So the question, as mentioned, is identify as to which of the following is not relevant in the context of language standardization. The options are selection of the norm, acceptance by the government, codification, and none of the above. So the correct option is I don't know.
The correct option here is none of the above. All the options listed, selection of the norm, acceptance by the government, and codification, are indeed relevant steps in the process of language standardization.
The next question is a processing error in which one word or phrase is heard as another, as hearing great ape when the utterance was great tape. This is known as slip of the ear. Now elaborate more on this.
A slip of the ear is a type of processing error where the listener misinterprets the sounds they hear, leading to the perception of a different word or phrase than what was actually said. This often happens because the listener's brain tries to make sense of unclear or ambiguous sounds by matching them with familiar words or phrases. For example, in the case of hearing great ape instead of gray tape, the similarity in sound patterns between the words leads to the error. Such slips can occur due to factors like background noise, the speaker's accent, or the listener's expectations. Unlike a slip of the tongue, which is when the speaker misspeaks, a slip of the ear is entirely on the listener's side.
All right, so the next is temporal lobes. So the temporal lobes are something like, there is a frontal lobe, and behind the frontal lobe, occipital lobe is at the last, and in between are parietal lobes, and um, I don't recall what four lobes are there in the brain.
You're right in mentioning some of the brain's lobes. The human brain has four main lobes, each responsible for different functions. One, frontal lobe, located at the front of the brain. It's involved in decision making, problem solving, controlling behavior and emotions, and voluntary movement. Two, parietal lobe, found behind the frontal lobe. It processes sensory information like touch, temperature, and pain. It also helps in spatial orientation and perception. Three, temporal lobe. Located beneath the frontal and parietal lobes, it's involved in processing auditory information, language, and memory. Four,
So
occipital lobe. At the back
frontal,
of the brain, it's primarily
parietal,
responsible for visual
temporal,
processing. So, the
occipital.
temporal lobe is situated roughly around the area of your ears and is crucial for hearing, understanding speech, and memory functions.
So temporal lobe is above and behind. Um, it's the thumb-like shape, right? Now the next is it has two assertions, first and second. First assertion is that the primary purpose of a child's linguistic environment is to provide information about the language that the child is acquiring. And the second, that psycholinguistics calls this type of information as positive evidence. Now go ahead and elaborate both of these assertions.
Let's break down the two assertions you've mentioned. First assertion: the primary purpose of a child's linguistic environment is to provide information about the language that the child is acquiring. This statement highlights the idea that the environment surrounding a child is rich with linguistic input, which is crucial for language acquisition. When children are exposed to speech from parents, caregivers, and others around them, they pick up on the sounds, words, grammar, and structure of the language being spoken. This exposure is essential because it helps children learn how to communicate effectively in their native language. The child's brain is wired to absorb this information, and the environment plays a critical role in shaping their language skills. Second assertion: psycholinguistics calls this type of information as positive evidence. In psycholinguistics, positive evidence refers to the correct examples of language that children hear in their environment. Positive evidence includes the grammatical sentences, vocabulary, and sounds that children are exposed to while learning a language. For instance, when a parent says, "The cat is on the mat," this sentence is a piece of positive evidence. The child hears a correctly formed sentence that follows the rules of grammar, which helps them understand and eventually replicate the structure in their own speech. To summarize, the first assertion is about the role of the environment in providing linguistic input, while the second assertion identifies this input as positive evidence in the context of language learning.
Now, the next question is a speech disorder in which utterances are produced in an excessively rapid, unrhythmical way is called cluttering. Now, explain this.
Cluttering is a speech disorder where the person's speech is characterized by an excessively fast, irregular, or jerky rhythm. Unlike stuttering, which involves repeated sounds or blocks in speech, cluttering is more about the overall flow and clarity of the speech. People with cluttering might speak so quickly that words become mumbled or slurred, omit or mix up syllables, making their speech difficult to understand, have disorganized or fragmented speech patterns where they jump from one idea to another without clear connections, experience difficulty in organizing their thoughts and expressing them in a coherent manner. Because of the rapid rate and disorganization, the listener may struggle to understand what is being said. Cluttering often goes unnoticed by the speaker themselves, as they may not realize that their speech is unclear. Speech therapy can be helpful in managing cluttering by focusing on slowing down speech, improving rhythm, and organizing thoughts before speaking.
So, the next is temporal activities. So, temporal activity, hemisphere dominance, contralateral control, logographic reading, alphabetic reading. So, temporal activity is probably logographic reading. No, it's not.
Temporal activity in the brain is indeed associated with various aspects of language processing, including reading. However, it's more closely related to the processing of auditory information and language comprehension rather than being specific to logographic reading alone. Logographic reading involves recognizing whole words or symbols that represent a word or phrase, like Chinese characters. This type of reading typically engages the right hemisphere of the brain more than alphabetic reading, which is usually processed in the left hemisphere and involves phonological decoding. Alphabetic reading, on the other hand, involves recognizing letters and converting them into sounds to form words, a process that's more directly linked to the left hemisphere, particularly in areas like the temporal lobe that handle phonological processing and word recognition. So while temporal activity is involved in reading processes, it's not exclusively tied to logographic reading. It plays a role in both types of reading, but the way the brain processes logographic and alphabetic systems can differ based on hemisphere dominance and the specific neural pathways engaged.
All right, the next is manner feature. Manner feature, um, anterior, high, consonantal, continuant. I think manner feature is what? Anterior? No, it's not. It's actually the continuant. Okay, I get it. I get it. Why? Anterior is a place of articulation. High is a place of articulation. Consonantal is not a neither of the two. You know, it's not a manner. It's not a place of articulation. But continuant is indeed a play. It's a manner of articulation. So I get why this is continuant manner feature. Now go ahead and elaborate more on this. You know, manner feature. Speak about manner feature.
You're on the right track with the distinctions you've made. Let's dive into the concept of manner of articulation and how it fits into the broader framework of phonetics. Manner of articulation refers to how the airflow is shaped and controlled during the production of speech sounds, particularly consonants. It describes the way in which the articulators, such as the tongue, lips, and glottis, interact to produce different types of sounds. Here's a closer look at some of the key manner features. 1. Continuant. This is a manner of articulation where the airflow is allowed to continue without complete closure in the vocal tract. Sounds like fricatives, e.g., f's, and approximants, e.g., o, r, are considered continuants because the air can flow continuously during their production. 2. Stop plosive. In this manner, there is a complete closure of the vocal tract, which stops the airflow momentarily. Then, the closure is released, allowing the air to burst out, as in sounds like pakong. 3. Nasal. Here, the airflow is directed through the nose due to the lowering of the velum. Nasal sounds include n. 4. Affricate. Affricates are a combination of a stop followed by a fricative. The sound starts with a complete closure, like a stop, but then is released into a narrow constriction, like a fricative, as in ch, as in ch. 5. Liquid. This category includes laterals like L and rhotics like R, where the airflow is shaped by the position of the tongue and other articulators, but without complete closure. 6. Glide semivowel. Glides, such as bu and j, involve a relatively free flow of air, similar to vowels, but they function as consonants in the syllable structure. Each of these manners affects how the speech sounds are perceived and distinguished from one another. While place of articulation refers to where in the vocal tract the constriction occurs, e.g., anterior for sounds produced towards the front of the mouth, the manner of articulation tells us how the sound is produced in terms of airflow and articulatory movement. So continuant is indeed a manner of articulation because it describes how the airflow is managed during the production of a sound, specifically that it continues without interruption. The other features you mentioned, such as anterior and high, relate more to the place of articulation and the position of the tongue rather than the manner in which the sound is produced.
All right, cool. So, tell me about the anterior thing. Where does this place of articulation lie? Where is it found?
The term anterior refers to a place of articulation in the mouth where the constriction occurs towards the front. Specifically, anterior sounds are produced with the constriction in the front part of the vocal tract, typically involving the tongue and the alveolar ridge or teeth. Here are some examples of anterior sounds. 1. Labial sounds. These are produced with the lips, such as im, f, and veal. 2. Dental sounds. These involve the tongue touching the teeth, such as thet as in think and ith as in this. 3. Alveolar sounds. These are produced with the tongue touching or coming close to the alveolar ridge, which is just behind the upper front teeth. Examples include t, s, z, and l. In contrast, posterior sounds are produced further back in the mouth, such as palatal, velar, or glottal sounds.
Hmm, that's interesting. That I think so. You can also help me elaborate what the distinctive feature theory is. So we'll do that later. We'll do that later. For now, okay, place of articulation feature. The next question is a place of articulation feature, and the place of articulation feature is obviously the anterior, and then the body of tongue feature. So body of tongue high. Okay, the next is a morpheme that has same phonetic shape but different semantic functions. Same phonetic shape but different semantic functions is a homophonous morpheme. Yes. um Tell me about yeah, so okay, I get it. Homophonous morphemes. Now the next question is a compound word or phrase with no head. So, a compound word or phrase with no head is an exocentric compound. Tell me more about it.
An exocentric compound is a type of compound word where the meaning of the whole is not directly related to the meaning of its individual parts. In other words, the compound does not have a head that determines the grammatical category or main meaning. For example, in the compound pickpocket, neither pick nor pocket alone gives a clear indication of the overall meaning, which is someone who steals from pockets. The term pickpocket does not have a clear head word that governs its meaning, making it an exocentric compound. This contrasts with endocentric compounds, where the head is clear and determines the category of the compound. For example, in toothbrush, brush is the head, and toothbrush is a type of brush used for teeth.
Tell me about enclitic.
क्या आप अनक्रेटिक के बारे में और जानकारी चाह रहे हैं या किसी और विषय पर बात करना चाहते हैं?
I want to talk about enclitic. Enclitic is one of the options given in the same question. The question is a compound word or phrase with no head and whose answer is exocentric compound. So one of the options in this question is enclitic. 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 Now elaborate to me. What does this mean?
It looks like there might be a confusion with the term NCL-TIC. The term you're referring to might actually be enclitic. An enclitic is a type of clitic that attaches to the end of a preceding word rather than standing alone. Unlike compound words or phrases, which combine multiple words to create a new meaning, enclitics modify or complete the meaning of the preceding word, but do not form new compound words themselves. So, in the context of the question, enclitic doesn't fit as an answer for a compound word or phrase with no head. The correct term for such a compound is indeed exocentric compound, where the compound as a whole doesn't have a head that determines its grammatical category.
Now, give me a brief description and elaboration with and also exemplify it. Tell me about enclitic.
It seems there might be a slight misunderstanding with the term Anquetek. It might be a typographical or transcription error. If you meant enclitic, here's a brief explanation. An enclitic is a type of clitic that attaches to the end of a preceding word. Clitics are linguistic units that function like words but are not fully independent and attach to other words for their meaning. Enclitics attach directly to the end of a word without forming a separate word. For example, in English, contractions like isn't or don't are similar to enclitics. Here, the ent in isn't and the ent in don't attach to the preceding word, effectively modifying it, but they do not stand alone as separate words. In languages like Greek or Spanish, enclitics can attach to verbs or pronouns, affecting their form and meaning. If Anquetek refers to something specific that I might not be familiar with, please provide more details or context so I can assist you better.
So, give me the examples of enclitic from Spanish. You just mentioned it.
In Spanish, enclitics are used with verbs and are attached to the end of them. Here are a few examples. 1, dímelo. Here, dime means tell me, and
Dímelo.
lo, it, is an enclitic pronoun attached to the end of the verb dime, making it dímelo, which means tell it to me. 2, cómelo. In this case, come means eat, and lo, it is attached to the end, making comelo, which means eat it. 3, hazlo. Haz means do, and lo is an enclitic,
Hazlo.
so hazlo means do it. In these examples, the enclitics lo and me are attached to the verbs to form commands.
Dímelo, cómelo, hazlo. Vale. Now, moving on to the next question. That determines the grammatical category and the meaning of the phrase and compound is head of a phrase or compound.
In language, by how its components are combined and their syntactic roles. For example, 1, toothbrush is a compound noun. It combines tooth and brush to specify an object used for brushing teeth. The grammatical category is a noun, and the meaning is derived from the specific function of the compound. To run up can be a phrasal verb when used in a sentence like, she ran up the hill. Run up indicates the action of running up. The grammatical category here is a verb phrase, and its meaning is determined by the context in which it is used. The grammatical category is influenced by the parts of speech involved and their syntactic relationships, while the meaning is derived from how the components interact within the phrase or compound.
The next is function, and function is associated with subject because subject is a functional category. Now let's move on to the next one. Ergative language. Ergative language. Hindi is an ergative language. Let's move on to the next one. Stress. Stress is related with focus. Now elaborate more on that.
Stress in language is often used to emphasize or highlight certain words or syllables in speech, which can affect the meaning or focus of a sentence. For instance, in English, stress can change the emphasis and clarify what is important in a sentence. When you stress a word, you're making it stand out, which helps in focusing the listener's attention on that particular part. For example, in the sentence, I didn't say she stole the money, stressing different words will imply different meanings. Stressing I implies that someone else might have said it. Stressing she suggests another person might be involved, and so on. So, stress plays a crucial role in signaling focus and conveying nuances in communication.
Now, the syntagmatic paradigmatic relation was explained by Ferdinand de Saussure. So, paradigmatic function is, the substitution of a word for another word. For example, it belongs to the same category as well. So for example, I eat an apple versus I buy an apple. So eat and buy are both verbs, right? And then we can replace apple with some other kind of noun. For example, I eat an apple versus I eat a banana. So that is the paradigmatic function. Now, if we talk about the syntagmatic relationship, so syntagmatic relationship talks about the relation between constituents within a phrase. So, for example, I eat an apple. So how I is combined with eat, and eat is combined with and an is combined with apple. This is what syntagmatic relationship talks about. Tell me more about the syntagmatic relationship.
The syntagmatic relationship, as explained by Ferdinand de Saussure, focuses on how words and elements combine in sequence to create meaning within a sentence. It's about the horizontal arrangement of elements in a sentence, where each component fits into the overall structure. For example, in the sentence I eat an apple, the syntagmatic relationship examines how I fits with eat fits with and an fits with apple. Each word depends on its position and relationship with adjacent words to convey meaning. The structure is crucial because changing the order or adding different words can alter the meaning. So, while paradigmatic relationships are about substitution within a category, syntagmatic relationships are about how elements work together in a sequence.
All right, moving on to the next question. Homonyms. Homonyms are, a same form with different meanings. Tell me more about homonyms.
Homonyms are words that share the same spelling or pronunciation but have different meanings. For instance, the word bat can refer to a flying mammal or a piece of sports equipment used in baseball. This can create confusion or ambiguity depending on the context. There are two main types of homonyms: homographs and homophones. Homographs are words that are spelled the same but pronounced differently and have different meanings, like lead, to guide, and lead, a medal. Homophones are words that sound the same but have different meanings and spellings, such as two, and two. Understanding homonyms often depends on context, as the meaning is derived from how the word is used in a sentence.
Now the next is synonyms. So synonyms are the sense relation between lexical items. Now the next, Basil Hatim.
Yes, synonyms are words that have similar meanings, but may vary slightly in nuance or usage. They can be used interchangeably in many contexts, though they often carry different connotations. For example, happy and joyful are synonyms because they both describe a positive emotional state, but joyful might imply a more intense or celebratory emotion. In studying synonyms, it's important to consider the context in which they are used, as some synonyms might be more appropriate in certain situations than others.
Now Basil Hatim and J. Monday, they wrote the book named Translation and Advanced Resource Book. So tell me more about this. When did they write it? What were the contents of the book? Um, so yeah, go ahead and do that.
Translation, an advanced resource book by Basil Hatim and Jeremy Monday, was published in 2004. The book is designed as a comprehensive resource for advanced students and professionals in translation studies. It covers various theoretical and practical aspects of translation, including theoretical frameworks and methodologies, translation strategies and techniques, analysis of texts and their contexts, practical exercises and case studies to apply the concepts discussed. It provides an in depth exploration of translation theory and practice, aiming to bridge the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application in translation.
Now, so the next is Peter Newmark, and so Peter Newmark has written about translation. So tell me more about this book. What were the contents? When was it written? Who wrote it? Where does he belong to? Which university? And also tell me about the places where Basil Hatim and Jeremy Monday belong to.
Peter Newmark wrote several influential books on translation, including a textbook of translation published in 1988. This book is a key resource for understanding translation theory and practice. It covers translation techniques and strategies, theoretical foundations of translation, practical exercises and examples. Peter Newmark was a British scholar known for his work in translation studies and his association with the University of Surrey. Basil Hatim is affiliated with the University of Leicester in the UK, and Jeremy Monday is also based in the UK, with connections to the University of Leeds.
So tell me about the book, The Theory and Practice of Translation. I think C.R. Tabor and Eugene Nida wrote this book.
The book, The Theory and Practice of Translation, was actually written by Eugene Nida and Charles R. Tabor. Published in 1969, this seminal work introduced and elaborated on dynamic equivalence in translation theory. The book focuses on principles of translation theory, the concept of dynamic equivalence, which emphasizes conveying the meaning and effect of the original text rather than a literal translation. Practical aspects of translating between languages. Eugene Nida was a prominent American linguist and translation theorist, and Charles R. Tabor was his collaborator in this influential work.
So tell me about the book of C.R. I'm sorry, Peter Newmark about translation. Tell me about the book. What are the contents of the book?
Peter Newmark's notable work on translation is titled Translation, Theory, and Practice. Published in 1991, this book explores various aspects of translation and provides insights into both theoretical and practical elements of the field. Key contents include overview of translation theories and methodologies, examination of the translation process, including the challenges and strategies involved, case studies and examples to illustrate different translation issues, discussion on the role of context and cultural factors in translation, Newmark's book aims to bridge the gap between theoretical concepts and practical application, making it a valuable resource for both students and practitioners in the field of translation.
Now, the next is Susan Bassnett and Andre Lefebvre. Now, they have written the book named Translation, History, and Culture. So, tell me about the book. Where was it written? When was it written? Where do these two authors belong to? What are the contents of the book? What what does it emphasize on, the book, where to which field does it particularly talk about? I know it talks about translation, but translation in what context? Where does where tell me about the whereabouts of the book.
Susan Bassnett and Andre Lefebvre co authored Translation, History, and Culture, published in 1990. Susan Bassnett is a prominent scholar in translation studies affiliated with the University of Warwick, while Andre Lefebvre is associated with the University of Paris 7. The book explores the interplay between translation and cultural contexts throughout history. It emphasizes how translation practices reflect and influence cultural and historical changes. The contents cover the role of translation in shaping cultural identities, historical perspectives on translation and its impact on literature and culture, theoretical frameworks for understanding translation's cultural significance, case studies illustrating the historical evolution of translation practices. Overall, the book addresses translation within the broader context of cultural and historical dynamics, providing insights into how translation interacts with and affects societal changes.
Now, the next is Joseph H. Greenberg. So, Joseph H. Greenberg has talked about the implicational universes, the language universes. Yes, the language universals, right? Now, the next is Keenan and Comrie. Keenan and Comrie have talked about the noun phrase accessibility hierarchy. Now, I want you to tell me about Keenan and Comrie, who they are, where do they belong to, in what year did they do this work? The noun phrase accessibility hierarchy. What are the major contributions of these two authors? Um, yes, do that.
Keenan and Comrie, specifically Bernard Comrie and Edward Keenan, are well-known linguists who made significant contributions to syntax and typology. Edward Keenan is a professor at UCLA, and Bernard Comrie is a professor at the University of Oxford. Their notable work on the noun phrase accessibility hierarchy was published in 1977. The noun phrase accessibility hierarchy is a framework that ranks different grammatical roles, like subject, direct object, indirect object, based on how accessible they are to certain syntactic processes. The hierarchy suggests that certain grammatical functions are more accessible than others for specific syntactic phenomena, such as relativization or passivization. Major contributions include noun phrase accessibility hierarchy provides a systematic way to understand how different grammatical roles interact with syntactic structures across languages. Typological studies. Their work has influenced cross-linguistic research, helping to identify patterns and universal tendencies in language structure. Their research has been instrumental in the field of syntax, influencing how linguists understand and analyze grammatical structures across diverse languages.
Now, the next is Lehman. Lehman is associated with implicational universals. So, elaborate more on, Lehman. Where did he study? When did he propose this idea? What is this idea? Do that.
Jürgen Lehmann is a German linguist known for his work on implicational universals. He studied at the University of Hamburg, where he contributed significantly to the field of linguistic typology. Lehman proposed the concept of implicational universals in the 1970s. His idea revolves around the idea that if a language has a certain feature, it often implies the presence of other related features. For example, if a language has a specific syntactic construction, it might also exhibit other related syntactic patterns. Implicational universals help linguists understand the patterns and relationships between different linguistic features across languages. They are used to predict the presence of certain linguistic characteristics based on the presence of others, offering a way to analyze and compare languages systematically.
All right, the next dictionary. So, dictionary is associated with common vocabulary. Thesaurus is associated with the related concepts. Now, tell me about this word. Where has it originated from? Thesaurus.
The word thesaurus originates from the Greek word thesauros, which means treasure or storehouse. It was used in English in the 17th century to refer to a collection or repository of valuable information. In the context of language, a thesaurus is a reference book that organizes words and their synonyms and antonyms, helping users find the right word for their needs.
Next is the electronic dictionary associated with digital. Next is information retrieval. So information retrieval is, I don't know. Four options mentioned are pattern recognition, stemming, formal analysis of sentence by the computer, speech recognition, and information retrieval is associated with stemming. So explain me, what is this phenomena exactly talking about? What in detail does this mean?
Information retrieval is about finding and obtaining information from large data sets or databases. In this context, stemming is a key process. It involves reducing words to their root forms. For example, running and runner would both be reduced to run. This helps in improving search results by matching different forms of a word to a common base, making it easier to retrieve relevant information.
The next is parsing. Parsing is associated with formal analysis of sentence by the computer. Now, tell me in detail about what all the processes are included within parsing.
Parsing involves analyzing sentences to understand their grammatical structure. The process includes several steps. First, tokenization breaks the text into individual words or tokens. Next, part of speech tagging assigns grammatical categories like noun or verb to each token. Then, syntactic parsing builds a tree structure representing sentence components and their relationships, following grammar rules. Finally, semantic analysis interprets the meaning based on the structure. Parsing helps computers understand and process language effectively.
Tell me more about tokenization. Tokenization, wherein the sentence is divided into tokens. Exemplify as well.
Tokenization is the process of breaking down a text into smaller units called tokens, which can be words, phrases, or symbols. For example, in the sentence, I love studying linguistics, tokenization would divide it into tokens like I love studying and linguistics. This step is crucial for text processing because it simplifies the analysis by isolating the components of the text, making it easier for subsequent steps like part of speech tagging and syntactic parsing.
Next is the OCR, that is the optical character recognition, and this is associated with pattern recognition. So tell me about OCR. Where was it developed? And what does it do? What are its applications? So tell me about those.
Optical character recognition, OCR, is a technology that converts different types of documents, such as scanned paper documents, PDFs, or images taken by a digital camera, into editable and searchable data. Developed in the mid 20th century, OCR uses pattern recognition techniques to identify characters in a scanned image and translate them into machine encoded text. Its applications are widespread, including digitizing printed documents for archives, automating data entry processes, reading text from images in various formats, and enabling text to speech technologies. Major companies and institutions have used OCR to enhance accessibility and streamline document management.
Next is the AGR based case theory, that is agreement based case theory. Now, this is associated with minimalism. Now, explain to me what is AGR based case theory. Explain to me what is minimalism in detail.
AGR based case theory, or agreement based case theory, is a concept in generative grammar, particularly within the minimalist framework proposed by Noam Chomsky. This theory posits that case features, which determine the grammatical role of nouns, like nominative, accusative, etc., are assigned based on agreement between different elements in a sentence. Essentially, the case a noun receives depends on its agreement with other parts of the sentence, such as the verb. Minimalism is a theoretical framework in linguistics also developed by Noam Chomsky. It aims to simplify and unify our understanding of the structure of language. The core idea is that the principles governing language can be expressed in the simplest terms possible. Minimalism reduces complex grammatical rules to more fundamental principles, suggesting that all languages share a common underlying structure. In this framework, linguistic theory focuses on the minimal set of principles and parameters needed to account for the observed diversity in languages. So, AGR based case theory fits within the minimalist framework, as it uses the idea of simplicity and universal principles to explain how case is assigned in various languages.
Now, the next is logical form. So, logical form is associated with government and binding, I believe. And yeah, go ahead and explain to me in detail what is the relation between logical form and government and binding. What is government and binding? What are the other associated concepts? Explain to me in detail.
Logical form, LF, is the level of representation in linguistic theory that deals with the abstract structure of sentences, focusing on their meaning. In the government and binding GB theory developed by Noam Chomsky, LF is crucial because it represents the syntactic structure that contributes to the sentence's interpretation and is closely related to semantic interpretation. In GB theory, LF is where certain syntactic rules and principles interact with semantic interpretation. For example, it helps in understanding how quantifiers, like every or some, are interpreted in different contexts, and how different parts of a sentence relate to each other in terms of meaning. Government and binding theory itself is a comprehensive framework for understanding syntax and its interaction with semantics. It includes several key concepts. One, government refers to how verbs or prepositions govern or control the case assignment of their arguments. Two, binding concerns the relationships between pronouns and the expressions they refer to, particularly how pronouns are linked to their antecedents within a sentence. 3. X-bar theory, a theory of phrase structure that explains how different types of phrases are constructed. 4. Transformations, rules that change the structure of a sentence to produce different forms, such as turning active sentences into passive ones. Logical form plays a role in the GB theory by providing a level of abstraction where the relationships between syntactic structures and their meanings can be examined. It ensures that the syntactic rules applied in sentence formation are consistent with the meaning derived from the sentence.
Now, the next is case. Case is associated with, I believe, inflection. Yes, and now explain to me how and why is case associated with inflection?
Yes, you're right. Case is closely associated with inflection. In grammar, case refers to the role that a noun or pronoun plays in a sentence, such as subject, object, or possessive. Inflection involves changing the form of a word to express different grammatical features like tense, number, gender, or case. Here's why case is associated with inflection. 1. Grammatical function. In many languages, nouns and pronouns change form depending on their grammatical function in a sentence. For example, in Latin, the word for friend is amicus in the nominative case subject and amicum in the accusative case object. These changes in form are inflections that signal the role of the word in the sentence. 2. Inflectional endings. Inflection often involves adding endings to words. For instance, in languages like German and Russian, different cases are indicated by specific suffixes added to nouns. This inflection helps distinguish between different grammatical roles, such as the subject or object of a verb. 3. Morphological changes. Inflection can include changes to the root of a word to reflect its case. For example, in some languages, the form of a word might change not only by adding endings, but also by altering the internal structure of the word. In summary, case is a grammatical feature that indicates a word's role in a sentence, and inflection is the mechanism by which these roles are marked by changing the form of the word.
Next is the parietal lobe. So, tell me about the parietal lobe.
The parietal lobe is one of the four main lobes of the brain, located near the top and back of the head. It is situated between the frontal lobe and the occipital lobe. The parietal lobe is involved in processing sensory information from the body, such as touch, temperature, and pain. It helps integrate sensory input to form a coherent perception of the environment. Additionally, it plays a role in spatial awareness and coordination, helping us understand where our body is in space and how to interact with objects around us.
So, can mapping an area uh, be said to be a function of the parietal lobe?
Yes, mapping an area can indeed be considered a function of the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe helps in spatial awareness and processing sensory information related to the body's position and movement in space. It allows us to create and maintain a mental map of our surroundings, which is crucial for tasks like navigation and understanding spatial relationships.
And what about the functions of the temporal lobe?
The temporal lobe is crucial for processing auditory information and is involved in the perception of sounds. It also plays a key role in memory formation and language comprehension. Areas within the temporal lobe, such as the hippocampus, are important for storing and retrieving memories, while other parts, like Wernicke's area, are essential for understanding language.
So, recognizing a speaker by his or her voice can be said to be a function of the temporal lobe. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Recognizing a speaker by their voice involves processing auditory information, which is a function of the temporal lobe.
So, the function of the parietal lobe is spatial orientation, whereas the function of the occipital lobe as well is, a perception of the visual information. So, what is the difference between the occipital lobe versus the parietal lobe?
The occipital lobe primarily handles visual processing, including interpreting visual stimuli and recognizing objects. In contrast, the parietal lobe is involved in spatial orientation and integrating sensory information from different parts of the body, helping us understand our position in space and coordinate movements. So while the occipital helps us understand where things are and how to interact with them.
So the parietal lobe is, it is above and in front of the temporal lobe, above and behind the temporal lobe, above and in front of the temporal, above and behind temporal lobe. That's where the parietal lobe exists. So parietal lobe is above the right, above the temporal lobe, whereas behind the frontal lobe. Is that not true about the positioning of the parietal lobe?
Yes, that's correct. The parietal lobe is located above the temporal lobe and behind the frontal lobe. It sits near the top and back of the brain, just above the temporal lobes and in front of the occipital lobe.
So the occipital lobe lies behind the temporal lobe. Okay, we have discussed about the functions of the occipital lobe. We'll repeat that same information one more time.
Sure, the occipital lobe, located at the back of the brain, is primarily responsible for visual processing. It helps in interpreting visual information from the eyes, such as recognizing shapes, colors, and motion.
So if I can sense whether a person is, riding his bike, his motorbike fast, too fast, is a function of the occipital lobe.
Yes, that's correct. If you're sensing whether someone is riding a bike fast, it's the occipital lobe that's helping you interpret the visual information about the speed and movement.
Now, holistic activity is associated with logographic reading. Tell me more about it. Tell me, how does this explain the logographic reading?
Holistic activity in logographic reading involves recognizing whole words or symbols as complete units rather than decoding individual letters or sounds. In logographic reading, like reading Chinese characters, each symbol represents a word or a concept, and the reader understands meaning through the entire symbol rather than by breaking it down into smaller parts. This process is efficient for languages with logographic writing systems because it relies on visual recognition of symbols as a whole.
All right, let's move on to the next, dichotic listening. Dichotic listening is associated with contralateral control. Tell me more about that.
Dichotic listening involves presenting different auditory stimuli to each ear simultaneously. It's used to study how the brain processes sounds and language. The concept of contralateral control means that each hemisphere of the brain processes information from the opposite ear. For example, stimuli presented to the right ear are primarily processed by the left hemisphere, which is often associated with language processing. This helps researchers understand how each hemisphere of the brain contributes to auditory perception and cognitive processing.
Now, the next is two half of the hemispheres. So that is associated with the hemisphere dominance of a language. Now, explain this.
Hemispheric dominance refers to the idea that one hemisphere of the brain is more specialized for certain functions. In language processing, for most people, the left hemisphere is dominant. It handles tasks such as grammar, vocabulary, and language comprehension. The right hemisphere is more involved in processing the emotional and contextual aspects of language. This division of labor helps in understanding how complex language functions are managed by different parts of the brain.